Okay, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're located. My name is Ty Alevizos. I'm a Satori solution architect. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. We're going to be very light on the slideware, and we're going to be hands-on keyboard in the product and the platform itself. If you have questions, feel free to use the Zoom features, raise your hand or ask a question. And if for some reason that's not working for you, we always encourage folks to reach out to us and we can work with you offline and answer any questions. Today, we're going to be looking at the Satori data portal. The data portal is a component of the Satori platform. It's included. It's not something extra that you have to deploy. And it allows your audience, the consumers of data that are using the Satori platform, to go to a central place and have access to a canonical set of all of the information that your data stewards and compliance teams and governance folks have already set up using the Satori platform. We're going to walk through a principle of least privilege, starting from 0 and then slowly increasing access for a sample user, and we'll show what that user sees as far as the end user experience. And we'll walk through a few different examples. I use a data client called DataGrip. Really, this could be any client. We'll also take a look at a Tableau online example, and hopefully that'll give you a sense of how this all works. We'll also be talking about management of credentials. Satori's data portal actually manages and brokers the credential management process. The net result of that process is that you don't need to hand out database usernames and passwords to all of your analysts and consumers. You can instead have that managed in Satori. We'll also try, if we have time, we'll take a look at our Slack integration, which allows your data analysts and consumers to request access to Satori via Slack, which will trigger the rest of the Satori platform and its workflows and so forth, and then provide your Slack audience with the same kind of access. And then we'll talk about the next webinar, which is happening on September 14th. So without further ado, I do see the attendee list has plateaued and seems to have leveled off, so we can jump right in and show folks the product. Let me bring up the first tab I want to show folks. If you've never seen the Satori platform, we always encourage folks to go to satoricyber.com/test drive. You can sign up for a fully functional test drive, and that includes some sample data that's already in the account, so you don't have to use your own sensitive PII or PHI information, and run through all of the things you're about to see or experiment using our documentation. So definitely recommend folks can sign up for a test drive. The next thing I'm going to show is the Satori platform itself. And again, just to kind of lay the groundwork here before we talk about the Satori data portal, the platform left-hand navigation reads kind of like a workflow. So when you first use Satori, you'll set up connections to your data stores, and there's a long and healthy list of data store vendors that we support. Then you'll interact with the platform and create masking profiles, security policies, and security data sets. And that's sort of at the heart of the configuration of Satori. And then finally, operationally or at runtime, Satori will automatically start to classify and inventory your information as it's queried, and your compliance and data steward teams can use the built-in reporting and logging. We're going to look at all of that right now in real time. By way of example, I have a database connection set up. It's Postgres. It could be in Azure, GCP, AWS, and right here on the screen, I have not really configured it for use by Satori. So there's a very important toggle switch here, which is give Satori control to this data set. That's not turned on yet. So this is sort of, starting from 0. In my tool, in this case, DataGrip, if I try to query that information, it's going to return all this sensitive data. It's fake data, of course. But my client here is actually connected to Satori. So you'll see that the URL is a satoricyber.net endpoint, and it's letting me in. And let's take a look at why that is. So again, it's because I have not given Satori control over the data. But because I'm using the Satori endpoint, there will be an audit entry. If I look at the last 5 minutes of our auditing here, you'll see probably just one entry. There it is. And you can also see that no action was taken. So it's, even if there's nothing else we show you today, it's that Satori can be an observer. They can provide you with extended auditing. And you can come in here and we'll look at this information in more detail in a moment, as far as what happened and what queries were run and that kind of thing. But now let's start to step it up and actually turn on some of the features. Again, with the principle of least privilege, if I turn control on for Satori and do nothing else on this screen, and I go back to my client tool and rerun this query, I'll actually get a blockage. Let's see, there it is. Access to unauthorized data. You know, of course, I already ran it, so I have it on the bottom there, but let's get rid of that and let's clear this out of there. This is no access. However, we have logged it. This is really important for compliance purposes. You know, because you're running everything through the Satori platform, if somebody doesn't have access, not only will we block them, but we'll log that as an event. And again, if I go back to the audit logs here, we'll see that now in the top entry, and we'll see an action of blocked somewhere in here. There it is, query blocked. And we can even show, you know, what the query was, what data set we were connecting to, and that kind of thing. Pretty neat. So let's keep stepping it up, right? Let's keep adding in the permissions. And now we're going to start to introduce the Satori data portal. So on the screen here, in the middle, it says, allow users to request access to this data set. Great, I've turned that on. The Satori data portal is available from the upper right command menu. It's a static URL, so you can hand this out to your audience. And if you have Satori up and running, they can come in here and see what data they have access to and what data is available that they can request access to. I've been given at some point in the past access to these top 3, and then I have a variety of data sets that are available to me. This really starts to introduce the power of curation of a secure data topology, right? So in addition to all of the masking and enforcement and auditing and data cataloging and classification that Satori provides, we also have sort of the flip side, the positive and optimistic experience of presenting to your audience a curated view of information that they should, you know, go to first, right? So you can start to send your audience to this location first. So let's go ahead and run through a very simple example. Where is my Postgres data store? Here it is. So I'm going to open up this one here, and I specify what kind of access I'd like, because you may have analysts that need to edit tables or create tables or do other work. In this case, I'll keep it simple. I need to put in a request message. Please grant for my project, which ends on September 15th. And then I'll click request. And that starts off a workflow, right? So now it says pending approval. You can see that there. And the user in question is now waiting for the data stewards to start to do something. Now, the data steward will get an email, but if I just refresh this page, that data steward, which is defined under the definition tab, now has a pending request. They can choose to deny it, approve it as is, or edit it. So there's default policies that can get set up. But in this case, the data steward could say, well, okay, they said that you know, it expires on September 15th, so let's actually put that in there. Or they can say, let's just give them 30 days and, you know, automatically have it expire. And also, you know, expire it in 5 days if it's never used. And let's enforce some default security policies or specify specific policies. We'll talk about security policies in a moment. But now if I click approve, This person is now granted access for the next 4 weeks, and life is good. And then back over in the data portal, if they refresh this page, they will now have the credentials they need, the host name and the port. And notice it doesn't include a username and password. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But Satori is transparent to authentication. If they've already been given a name and password, they can use that. And if you want Satori to manage it, we're going to talk about that in a moment. But now if I rerun this query, now I have my information and it's redacted, right? So no other changes made except to use this very powerful part of the Satori platform around managing access with the Satori data portal. But you can see on the screen here, we've done a bit of hashing. We've hashed the first name and the last name. We've redacted the email. We hashed the address and so forth. A lot of this, we cropped the birth date field here down to the year. So it's always January 1st and so forth, right? In other webinars or other parts of our product and platform, you can learn all about how masking works and security profiles work and that kind of thing. But let's keep going, because the next thing to show you is that you probably don't want to grant manually, right? So I'm going to revoke that access. And you really probably don't want your data stewards to have to manually approve every access. You can, and that's available to you. But another way to approach the problem is to create a self-service access rule. So I'm going to turn on that toggle box now. It says, allow users to access this data set, and let's give them a self-service rule. We'll just keep it simple for now. I will point out that we have full integration with single sign-on systems. So if you have groups defined in Okta or Active Directory, those can show up here. But for now, I'll just keep it simple and say that everybody's going to get read-only access for 30 days, automatically expires in 5 days if it's not used. And let's again keep it simple and use the default security policy. So that's nice. We've turned on all 3 of the access points for this data now. If I go back to the data portal and just refresh, you'll see the Postgres example is now down below here. Same premise, right? We want to come in and ask for access. Why do we want to have folks ask for access? And the answer is for compliance and auditing and monitoring reasons. This is a really invaluable part of our product to allow access, but to require there to be a checkpoint, whether it's manual, which you saw before, or automatic, which you're about to see right now. So we'll do please grant, okay, thanks. And then I'll click request. What's happened now is no human intervention was required. If I come back over here and just refresh this data set page, we will see now the Ty demo Alevizos was automatically added, it expires in 4 weeks, default policy. And that's because of this self-service rule at the bottom of the screen. And then this person now can go off and start to do their work. And of course, there's that Postgres connection showing up under my data. So that's pretty nifty. The last thing to point out here is you can combine all of these things. You can have self-service rule. Let me change this self-service rule for just one group, right? You can say, let me actually delete that and start over. You can say, I want a self-service rule for my analytics group, and I just want to make sure they're always logged, or my logistics team. So we'll choose that one, and it expires in 30 days. It's automatically revoked if it's not used in 5 days. We could add a second rule that says, somebody else should have some other kind of powers, right? My data science team or my HR team needs full access, but we still want them to request using the data portal, again, for monitoring and tracking of that access. Meanwhile, if they're not in either of those teams, because we've turned on this middle toggle switch, they can still request manually, and that will go to the inbox of the data steward for this data set. And finally, you can have permanent access rules. You can just say, this other group needs read and write access, it never expires, and so forth. And you can mix and match all 3 of these types of security access rules inside of one data set. Where it gets really interesting, and then we're going to switch gears a little bit, is that this doesn't have to just control Postgres. If I come back in here, you can see, by the way, here are the data stewards. You can have multiple data stewards if you want to. But most importantly, in the future, I've done all of this security work. I've set up security policies and masking profiles that are being used by those. And I've created all of these access rules. And then perhaps at some point in the future, you now start to use a different data set. Wouldn't it be great to just come in and add that data set here and have all of the work you just did continue to apply? And with that one addition, everything I've done up until this point in time now is going to apply to my second data source and a third one, and so forth. So it's very powerful in terms of the reusability of the configuration itself. Again, if there are questions, let us know and we'll try to answer them in real time. But otherwise, I will keep going. I'm going to undo what I just did because I'll probably forget about it in the future. So let's go back to the data portal and focus in on a few other elements. The portal itself can be skinned and themed, so you can change the colors and the logo, so you can make this experience match the rest of your organization. And as we mentioned earlier, the access credentials themselves can be managed by Satori. So if we go back to my client, this data grip tool, and go edit the connection, you can see that I'm using a user called ty_demo. And I will stipulate for the folks watching that there is no database account with that username. That is a Satori username, and it comes from this key icon in the upper left of the data portal. So your audience, your end users, can have their own temporary data store credentials. This platform, my installation of Satori, I have it configured so that the credentials expire in 2 months. But as the administrator of the platform, I can go to settings and then user management. Actually, I can't remember where it is. I think it's under account settings. Here it is. Data portal settings. And I can say, no, I want all of my audience to have temporary credentials, and I want them to always expire after 3 days or 3 hours or what have you. That's also very valuable from kind of a set it and forget it point of view. You want to be able to give your consumers the ability to connect to data, and you also don't want to have to track those credentials over time. And so this is a really nice feature. I'll leave that alone at 8 weeks because it's just convenient for me. And then armed with this username and password, you can then pull up whatever tool you'd like to. So let's actually, for fun, go find my Tableau information here. And I happen to have a connection to the same Postgres database. We go edit that connection. You can see that it's connecting to satoricyber.net and using this Satori managed credentials. And I'm prompting. It's pretty common for our customers and folks out there in the world to use Tableau Online or Looker or Power BI or any of the other BI platforms in a manual manner. These platforms traditionally came from a dashboarding point of view, and we support that as well, so that you want to have complex dashboards managed in Tableau where you know who the end user is and they can't edit the dashboard. It's for consumption only. But lately, in the last, I'd say 5 years or more, we've also started to see these BI platforms be used in an ad hoc manner, right? So the operators, the end users of these platforms, they want to come in and build their own views, right? So now on the screen here, it's asking me to log into the database. But instead of handing out credentials to the database, I'm actually going to use my Satori username and token. This is incredibly powerful, right? So at a glance, I'm going to just log in now and not try to, I'm not going to save my password. This is a kind of a one-off experience. And here's my data, and I can start to interrogate it and interact with it. And it's running through Satori. So when I bring out one of these fields that should be redacted by the Satori platform, let's see what happens. There it is, and so forth and so on. So you can keep going from here. Hopefully you get the point that All of this information is being managed handily by Tableau, as well as by Satori, in a totally transparent and seamless manner. I will quickly pause there just to look at our Q&A screen. I don't see any questions coming through. I think we're okay. The next thing I thought I'd show, so just to review, let's go back to our slideware here. We stepped through a principle of least privilege and started from 0, and then increasingly granted more and more access mechanisms for my fictitious end user. And then we also talked about just-in-time access. We showed you some of those exploration features, as well as the management of user credentials and database passwords and so forth. There are a couple of questions coming in. One of them was, can this all be done down at the field level and the attribute level? And the answer is yes. So it's not part of the data portal subject, but I'm more than happy to quickly walk folks through what some of these features look like in the platform. So let's go back to our Postgres database. Here it is. This is a Satori data set. It's not a set of data, but really it's a collection of security information about data stores. And we've been hinting at the fact that it has default security policies. Well, those are defined under the security policies tab, and it's called very restricted example policy for Postgres. By the way, we also have a full access history inside of this same view. All of the grants that were occurred, any revocations that occurred, all of the requests. So again, from an auditing and compliance point of view, there's a breadcrumbs and trail of everything that's happened to all of the data stores that this data set is managing. But if we go look at that security policy, it was called very restricted example policy for Postgres. You can see that it has a couple of different components to it. It has dynamic masking rules. We kept this simple, but you can have a second group in here. If the user's a member of some other group, let's do a different masking, right? So things like that are totally doable. And you can also have data filtering, which we won't have time to talk about today, but this is row-level filtering based upon who your audience is or what memberships they have to which groups. But this simple, very restricted security policy is in turn triggering a masking profile called restricted profile for this database. And so let's actually drill into that masking profile. I'm not going to save my changes here. And if we go look at that restricted profile, masking profile, you can see that, yes, it's down to the attribute level, and you can be very specific. The other answer to the question that came in from Santosh, thank you, is that Satori is looking at the queries that come through our platform in real time. So if we go drill into that same Postgres data set down to the schema called public, into the table called people, you can see that a lot of this was done automatically by Satori, and you can also add your own classifiers. You're seeing some hints of that here on the screen where it says custom classifier. In other words, Satori is and operates as a data cataloging and data classification platform as much as it is about restriction and masking and redaction. So at a glance, you could come in here and I could add, you can see we've added 2 tags for SSN, for social security number, and we could add another one for my last names or allergies or what have you. A lot of these tags ship with the product. So all of these are not things you have to do data entry on. It just works as expected out of the box. And of course, you can change it. So perhaps you're an organization that doesn't want to redact address. You could come in here and just remove that. When you choose to make a change, we need a reason code or some kind of explanation, again, for logging and tracking. So all very supported, right? So now I've removed address from the classification engine. Another question that came through is, does Satori modify the data between source and client or only modify the query before data is passed to the client? It's the latter, if I'm understanding your question. We modify the result set, the tuples. We do not modify the original query. That's very important because what if your field that you want to mask is also a primary key? And in fact, over in DataGrip, I had an example of that. We didn't run it, but right here, if customer ID is used in a join, you don't want us to mask it before we send it to the data store, or else it won't work well. That would be very bad. So that's fully supported. Somebody asked about performance implications on the transactions. It's either next to zero or in some cases negative latency, depending on the situation and the kind of masking you're doing. Definitely don't have time to get too much into that, but the latency is nearly non-existent. That's a really good question. One last thing to show, and then we can open it up for more questions. Again, just getting back to our agenda here. Yep, we're making good progress. So now let's take a look at our Slack integration. I have that over here in another window. Hang on one second. So to demonstrate this, I did not want to modify, we use Slack here at Satori, but I did not want to modify our Satori corporate Slack. So I went ahead and created my own, free trial of Slack. I'm running that as a Satori 2022 demo. And also I have the data portal open as that same user. So I'm using a Gmail address, kind of a throwaway demo address. And back over in the platform itself, I'll just quickly show this. Under settings, you can integrate with Slack. So under integrations, Slack is one of the ways to do that. And you would just come in and add a new integration. In the browser experience here, you need to be both in a, somebody that can connect to Satori's account settings, as well as a Slack administrator, right? So, a Slack end user cannot do this, but it's very easy to set up. It's one click. And once it's set up, back over in, let's close some of these windows now. Back over in my Slack experience, I can start to do something like this. Satori Access. And this is going to bring up all of the data sets that are in my integration, right? So here they are. And again, I could choose one of these. I'll choose Azure SQL and say what kind of access I want, please grant, and then click request access. So this experience that you saw also works in Slack. It looks like Satori was smart enough to tell me that I already have access to that data set. And sure enough, it's probably, there it is, it's showing up. So let's try testing only and do Satori access. And I'll choose testing only and give a reason code and what kind of access I'd like. And that will again fire off the workflow that we saw earlier. Let's walk through that. The data set was called testing only. That data steward is going to receive an email. And sure enough, in testing only under the user access rules, there's one pending request. That Gmail account has asked for access, and you can deny and approve and change it just like we showed earlier. I'll go ahead and click approve. And back in Slack, it says it already kicked in, it happened immediately, but there's a notification under the Satori app that access was granted, and then you can take you right to your username and key and start to use that information and so forth. So that's another nice way to make this as seamless of an experience as possible when you're using the Satori data portal. That's the walkthrough. At this point, I definitely encourage other questions. In the next few minutes that we have, we could perhaps buy you folks back some time while folks are thinking about the questions that they might have. This is a great chance for me to talk about the next webinar, which is coming up on September 14th, and do have a window for that here. This will be run by Ben Hertzberg. He's our chief scientist with Satori, and he's going to be walking through a kind of a deeper dive into data access controls with RBAC and ABAC and just-in-time authorization. with a focus on the Satori platform, of course, and how we can help streamline a lot of the security headaches and difficulties that our customers had to go through before they started using Satori. And that I think the most important item on the screen here is there's no one right answer. Excuse me. Some of our customers have topologies that are unique to themselves, and they need very specific solutions for their topologies. And other customers have different situations. And Satori is really all about choice. So everything you saw in the platform earlier here, especially around data sets, security policies, and masking profiles, those three constructs in the Satori platform represent a many to many relationship. Data sets can control multiple data sources. Data sets can have multiple users and groups. Data sets can have multiple security policies. Security policies can have multiple masking profiles, and so forth and so on. So yeah, some really interesting choices going on here. A couple more questions coming through in the chat. Do we integrate with Active Directory and LDAP? The answer is yes. So for that, I'll definitely just refer you to our documentation. There's a whole section on single sign-on. We have support for SCIM. So if you're using a SAML provider and you'd like to actually provision Satori with usernames and groups, that kind of thing, totally supported. Let me look at our question board here. Does Satori support Mongo? Early access to MongoDB is starting next month, which is in 2 days. So that is imminently being released in kind of an early preview mode. So great question. I'm personally looking forward to getting my hands on that as well. And then for the folks that ask questions about pricing, whether it's by connector or usage-based, definitely reach out to our sales team. In the abstract, we are about active concurrent users in the system. So we're not pricing our product based upon throughput or query count or things like that. Great questions. It's not an ouch question, by the way, for the person who asked it. Thank you so much. So, again, just to review, if you've never seen the product, our documentation is a great place to start, as well as the Getting Started landing page, as well as our test drive. So /test drive is a really great way, oops, assuming I can type it correctly, really great way to get up and running, with some fake data in there that's safe for you to interact with. And you can experience everything that you just saw in real time. I'm not sure if there are other questions. Let me take a look at our question. How long does it take to implement Satori? Well, on the screen, it's a great question. On the screen, you saw me using it in a matter of seconds and minutes. Obviously, there's a little bit more to that, but we really have made this pretty easy. The other answer to your question is around the deployability of Satori. So for that, going back to our documentation, Satori is what we like to call a deploy anywhere. So a lot of SaaS software is truly only SaaS. Satori is not one of those. So we can deploy 100% SaaS where it's seamless and managed by us. We can also deploy our product to a private VPC of your choosing, and our customers can choose to deploy Satori to their own VPC and their own cloud. We're using very modern technologies around Kubernetes and containerization. And so in the case of AWS, it's EKS, and in the case of Azure and GCP, it's other tech that ships with those clouds. Pretty straightforward process, and one that we have a lot of experience implementing. I guess in the abstract, for the person who asked, how long does it take to implement Satori? In the abstract, I would say that it's measured in hours and days, as opposed to days and weeks, is a nice kind of general way to answer that question. Karen, I think we've arrived towards the end. Oops, one more question. Do you support failover, high availability? Yes, all of that is due to the containerization of the platform. It's extremely highly available and has failover support. So great question. And then somebody asked, do we support Redshift? And the answer is yes. That is, in fact, one of the supported data stores. And you can come in here and see we've got one up and running. and you could build a new connection to Redshift straight from within the platform. I'll keep my eye open on the webinar chat and Q&A. Looks like we're okay with questions. If folks are shy and they had a question that they didn't feel comfortable asking, you're welcome to take that offline. But we're also happy to answer that on this webinar. Well, I'll stay on in case there are other questions. But thanks so much for coming to our webinar on the Satori Data Portal. And again, save your spot and keep your ears and eyes open for September 14th at 11 o'clock Pacific time for another Satori webinar with our chief scientist, Ben Hertzberg. It's a really great chance to meet and talk, interact with Ben, as well as dig deeper into security concepts around the Satori platform. Great questions that came in, by the way. Always appreciate an interactive audience. Karen, I'm going to stay on the line in case people ask questions, but I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording at this point. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We really appreciate your engagement and all of the questions that we received. And we hope that you'll continue to explore the Satori platform as time permits on your end.